Today's Perspective segment is dedicated to the Nice terror trial. 6 years have gone by since an Islamic State group sympathiser hurtled down the seafront in Nice in a truck, leaving 86 people dead. This Monday, the trial of 8 people accused of playing a role in that bloodshed is getting underway. For more, we can speak now to our guest, the counter-terrorism expert Raffaello Pantucci. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24 for today's Perspective. First of all, for the second time in recent months, a major terrorism trial is getting underway on French soil. It's clearly an important day for the victims' families, the victims' loved ones, but it's also an important day for authorities as well. Just what is the message that the French judicial system is sending out here?
Well, thank you for the invitation to join you. I think the message that is being sent, on the one hand, as you already suggested, is very heavily towards the victims. This was a horrendous terrorist attack where we saw 86 people brutally killed and hundreds more injured as they were celebrating Bastille Day, a day of huge celebration in France. So the act itself, caused a lot of victims. And for victims, having a trial like this is very important in trying to give them some closure on this horrible act which they were dragged into. I think the other side of this coin is the fact that all of the people we're seeing who are being prosecuted here, all 8 of the individuals involved, are people who either knew about the act and didn't report it, or potentially helped the assailant in launching his attack. And I think the key message that authorities are sending here is that it doesn't matter if you're just involved in perpetrating a terrorist attack. It matters if you're involved in supporting or tacitly supporting a terrorist attack. They will punish you as well. And this is a very similar message that we saw a few months ago with the terror trial against the November 2015 attackers in Paris, famously for the particular assault on the Bataclan, but of course it was a much wider assault in Paris. There we saw 20 people being prosecuted, only one of whom had been directly involved in the actual attack. All of the others are kind of support figures or people who may have known about it. And I think the key message here authorities are sending is that we will prosecute you to the full extent of our legislation if you are involved in any way, shape or form with a terrorist atrocity.
Let's get into the nitty-gritty of this trial that's about to get underway here in Paris. We have 7 men and 1 woman on trial. What more do we know about the actual alleged role that they played in this attack, and how did this network apparently operate?
I think we're going to learn a lot about the detail of this as the trial proceeds. I think what we know so far is that a number of them were helping him indirectly through getting the weapons that he was using, or in helping him scope out the target he was going for. And others seem to have just known about the act, or potentially known about the act, and not reported it to the authorities. So I think we're going to discover a lot more about the sort of mechanics of what actually happened and how they were all individually involved or not as the trial proceeds. But at the moment, it appears as though essentially each one either knew about, I think about 5 of them were directly involved in one part of the activity, either sourcing the weapons that he had, or helping him scope the target, or decide what exactly he was going to do. And then a few of them seem to have known about the potential act and not reported it.
Now, we used to talk a great deal about the Islamic State organization, its spread, its operations and its goals. But 6 years after this attack in Nice, where is the group right now?
I think that's a very difficult question to answer briefly, but I will be as concise as I can. I think the key thing about the Islamic State group is that it is a group that continues to exist. I think what we've seen happen in different areas, we've seen different volumes of activity. So, for example, if you look at the group's heartland in Syria and Iraq, it does continue to have a presence there. And in Iraq in particular, we've seen it launching, quite a few large-scale attacks. At the same time, in Syria, it does seem to be a very reduced force, and other groups have sort of pushed it out. But it is still definitely a real presence there, and still able within that territory to launch quite a lot of attack. We've seen a real surge in Islamic State activity in Africa and West Africa and the sub-Saharan region in particular, but also in places like Mozambique and in other places like Central African Republic and elsewhere, where we have seen the group really take advantage of sort of ongoing conflicts to grow its brand and develop. And in some ways, the African brands of ISIS are the ones that have been growing most substantially of late. The only other organization within the sort of group's wider global context I would flag up is the Islamic State in Khorasan province in Afghanistan, where we've seen it develop as the sort of the main adversary organization to the Taliban, and one that has started to, spread its wings into neighboring countries as well. Within a European context, the threat from the Islamic State still seems to exist, but more in kind of what I would describe as echoes, in the sense that we still see a lot of kind of individual lone actor style attacks, individuals stabbing at people around them, maybe trying to drive cars into crowds, similar to the atrocity we saw in 2016 in Nice, but on a much smaller scale. And the individuals appear sometimes to have some Islamic State connections or leanings, but it's never very clear that the group knows who they were at all, always trying to direct them to do what they actually tried to perpetrate. And that seems to be the extent of the threat from the Islamic State that we see in Europe. But given all these growth we can see in other parts of the world, there's always the fear that the group could kind of regroup and start to refocus once again in a European direction.
And very briefly, if we can just come back to France, what's changed for France, for France's counter-terrorism officials? Have lessons been learnt since Nice?
I think a lot of lessons have been learned. And I think we should probably add 2015 as well, and the attacks we saw in the office of Charlie Hebdo, the horrible attacks in November 2015 on Paris, and then the numerous lone actor attacks we saw around that period. I think French security forces before that had been somewhat, had not really focused on the threat adequately. And I think they really had to sharpen their response in response to those horrible events. And I think the security blanket that we can now see in France has undoubtedly given France a much greater degree of security from such terrorist atrocities. Clearly, they haven't entirely gone away and the threat still is out there. But at the same time, I think the fact that now we're only seeing these kinds of lone actor style attacks is probably a reflection of the fact that French security forces have gotten very good at understanding the networks that they're going after and trying to prevent them before they can launch an attack.
Okay, Raffaello Pantucci, a counter-terrorism expert. That's all we have time for, but thank you so much for being with us today on Perspective. Thank you so much.